USS Enterprise, CV-6, was launched on October 3, 1936, at the Newport News Shipbuilding Yard in Virginia. She was the second Yorktown-class aircraft carrier designed as a response to rising tensions in the Pacific and the naval arms race. Construction began in July 1934, and the cost amounted to $18 million, an astronomical sum for that era. The ship measured 246 meters in length and could carry up to 90 aircraft. Her name was chosen to honor earlier ships bearing the same name, a tradition dating back to the American War of Independence. The ship's sponsor was the wife of the Secretary of the Navy, and the launching ceremony attracted thousands of spectators. Enterprise was commissioned on May 12, 1938, under the command of Captain Newton H. White, Jr. Her early years in service were devoted to intensive Atlantic training exercises and fleet maneuvers, during which the crew perfected takeoff and landing procedures. No one could have imagined that this steel giant would become a symbol of American resilience and survival. In 1939, Enterprise was transferred to the Pacific Fleet, where she would play a crucial role in the coming war. Her crew numbered about 2,200 sailors, and she carried the most advanced aircraft of her time. The carrier was equipped with the best communication and radar systems available, giving her an advantage in future operations. On the morning of December 7, 1941, USS Enterprise was about 200 nautical miles west of Pearl Harbor, returning from a mission delivering fighter aircraft to Wake Atoll. That seemingly routine assignment saved her from destruction. When Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor at 7:55 a.m., Enterprise was still far from danger. Tension filled the ship as the crew heard conflicting radio reports about the attack. Rear Admiral William Halsey, commanding Enterprise's task force, immediately dispatched squadrons to aid Pearl Harbor. Tragically, several of these planes were mistakenly shot down by friendly anti-aircraft fire amid the chaos. Lieutenant Clarence Dickinson, returning to base, witnessed scenes of devastation: burning ships, black smoke blanketing the sky, explosions shaking the entire island. Enterprise entered Pearl Harbor late that afternoon, passing the wrecks of USS Arizona, Oklahoma, and California. The sight was devastating. The proud Pacific Fleet lay in ruins, but Enterprise had survived, and from that moment she became America's greatest hope in the Pacific. In the following days, her crew worked tirelessly to ready the ship for counterattack. Halsey, known for his aggressive leadership, vowed revenge. For Enterprise's crew, a long journey across the ocean had begun. After Pearl Harbor, Enterprise became the spearhead of America's response. As early as February 1942, the carrier conducted a series of daring raids against Japanese positions in the Pacific. The first target was the Marshall Islands. On February 1st, aircraft from Enterprise struck the atolls of Kwajalein and Woche. It was the first American offensive action of the war, and although its material results were limited, the psychological impact was enormous. The Japanese, who had felt invincible, suddenly had to defend their own bases. On February 24th, Enterprise took part in a raid on Wake Island, an outpost that had heroically resisted Japanese attack the previous December. Then, on March 4th, aircraft from Enterprise struck Marcus Island, only 1,000 miles from Tokyo. These missions were extremely risky. The carrier operated deep within enemy territory with minimal support. But Halsey knew that America needed victories, even symbolic ones. Each raid was meticulously planned: approach under cover of night, strike at dawn, and retreat swiftly. The Japanese Navy desperately tried to locate Enterprise, but Big E was always one step ahead. For the American public, still reeling from Pearl Harbor, these raids were a balm for the national spirit. Enterprise was becoming a legend even before the great battles to come. Her crew worked to exhaustion. Pilots flew multiple sorties per day, and mechanics repaired damaged aircraft on the fly. In April 1942, Enterprise played a key role in one of the boldest operations of the war, the Doolittle Raid. The plan was audacious: to launch B-25 bombers to strike Tokyo, taking off from the carrier USS Hornet. Enterprise served as an escort, protecting Hornet during the approach to Japan. On April 2nd, both carriers departed San Francisco in utmost secrecy. Aboard Hornet were 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, aircraft much larger than any normally used on carriers. No one had ever attempted to launch such planes from a flight deck. Enterprise sailed about 50 miles ahead, her planes patrolling the skies and seas. On April 18th, about 650 miles from Japan, the task force was spotted by a Japanese patrol boat. Admiral Halsey made an instant decision: sink the boat and launch the bombers early. Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle took off first, followed by the others. Enterprise watched the historic takeoffs and then turned back, covering the retreat. The bombers reached Tokyo and dropped their bombs, the first attack on the Japanese home islands. The psychological effect was immense, though most of the planes later crashed in China. Enterprise returned safely to Pearl Harbor, and Halsey became a national hero. For the crew of Big E, it was just another mission, dangerous, but flawlessly executed. The Battle of Midway was the defining engagement of Enterprise's career. In late May 1942, American codebreakers deciphered Japanese communications and uncovered their plan to attack Midway Atoll. Admiral Chester Nimitz assembled all available carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown. Enterprise served as flagship for Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, who replaced the ill Halsey. On the morning of June 4th, American scouts located the Japanese fleet, 4 carriers with elite crews, the same ones that had devastated Pearl Harbor. The first wave of American torpedo bombers was slaughtered, almost none returned, but their sacrifice drew Japanese fighters down to low altitude. Then came the dive bombers from Enterprise. Led by Lieutenant Richard Best, the VB-6 squadrons struck Akagi and Kaga within minutes, setting them ablaze. Enterprise lost 14 aircraft that day, but her pilots destroyed 2 enemy carriers. Later that afternoon, planes from Yorktown sank Soryu, and Enterprise finished the job by destroying Hiryu that evening. In just 3 days, Japan lost 4 carriers and hundreds of its best pilots. Enterprise emerged unscathed, and her crew knew they had taken part in history. Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War. Japan would never regain the initiative. For Big E, it was only the first of many great battles yet to come. After the victory at Midway, Enterprise was thrust into another brutal campaign, the struggle for Guadalcanal. On August 7, 1942, U.S. Marines landed on the island, beginning a 6-month battle for control of the strategic airfield, later known as Henderson Field. Enterprise supported the invasion, her aircraft striking Japanese positions and supply routes. On August 24th, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons erupted, the first carrier versus carrier clash since Midway. The Japanese used the carrier Ryujo as bait, while the heavier Shokaku and Zuikaku followed behind. Enterprise launched aircraft that successfully sank Ryujo, but then Japanese dive bombers found Big E. Around 5 p.m., waves of Val dive bombers plunged toward the carrier. Enterprise twisted violently, anti-aircraft guns firing thousands of shells into the sky. 3 bombs struck home. The first hit the aft flight deck, killing 35 men and igniting massive fires. The second smashed into the middeck, and the third punched through 3 decks before exploding deep inside. The ship burned and listed, but her crew fought for survival. Within an hour, the fires were contained. Within 3, the flight deck was operational again. It was the first of many wounds Big E would endure and survive. She returned to Pearl Harbor for repairs, but by October she was back in action. Her crew had learned a vital truth. Enterprise could take almost anything and keep fighting. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands marked the darkest hour for Enterprise. After repairs, the carrier returned to the Solomons in October 1942. The situation was desperate. USS Wasp had been sunk by a submarine on September 15, and USS Saratoga had been crippled by a torpedo. Only USS Hornet and Enterprise remained operational in the Pacific. On October 26th, the two faced the Japanese fleet. That morning, Enterprise's aircraft damaged the carrier Zuiho, but the Japanese held a numerical advantage, 4 carriers against 2. At 10 a.m., Japanese planes struck Hornet, hitting her with torpedoes and bombs. Hornet burned fiercely and lost speed. Enterprise was now alone. Around noon, another wave of Japanese aircraft located her. The carrier maneuvered frantically, her guns throwing up a wall of steel. 2 bombs hit, one on the bow, another along the starboard side. Enterprise was damaged but not sunk. Her pilots fought back, scoring hits on Shokaku and Zuikaku. By day's end, Hornet was so badly damaged she had to be abandoned. Enterprise stood as the only operational American carrier left in the Pacific. Tokyo Radio triumphantly announced the destruction of all U.S. carriers, but Big E still sailed, a lone guardian on an endless ocean, bearing the weight of an entire campaign. After Santa Cruz, Enterprise was indeed the only operational American carrier in the Pacific. Saratoga was under repair, Hornet lay at the bottom, and the new Essex-class ships were still incomplete. For over 3 months, Big E carried the burden of the entire Pacific War on her decks. Her crew worked to exhaustion. Pilots flew multiple sorties a day, mechanics labored without rest, and the ship rarely left combat waters. Admiral Halsey, commanding operations at Guadalcanal, knew that if Enterprise were lost, the campaign would be finished. Every mission was a risk. Every day could have been her last. Yet Big E sailed on. Her planes supported the Marines on Guadalcanal, attacked Japanese convoys, and intercepted enemy raids. On the night of November 30th, during the Battle of Tassafaronga, American cruisers were ambushed by Japanese destroyers, armed with deadly long-lance torpedoes. USS Northampton sank, and 3 other cruisers were heavily damaged. Enterprise provided cover for their withdrawal. By December, the Guadalcanal campaign had reached a climax. The Japanese attempted to evacuate their forces, and Enterprise struck their transport convoys. Every torpedo, every bomb counted. At last, in February 1943, new carriers arrived in the Pacific, and Enterprise could finally rest. She returned to Pearl Harbor for repairs and crew leave, but by then, her legend was already immortal. After months of refitting and modernization, Enterprise returned to action in the autumn of 1943. American strategy had shifted. Rather than a slow advance across the Pacific, Admiral Nimitz planned a series of bold, island-hopping leaps through the Central Pacific. The first targets were the Gilbert Islands, the atolls of Tarawa and Makan. On November 19, 1943, U.S. Marines landed on Tarawa in one of the bloodiest amphibious assaults of the war. Japanese defenders fought with fanatical resolve. Every bunker had to be taken by hand. Enterprise supported the landings, her aircraft bombing enemy strongholds and repelling counterattacks. The battle was brutal. Of 5,000 Marines, 1,500 were killed or wounded in just 3 days. Enterprise lost several aircraft over the tiny island, but her contribution was decisive to victory. At the same time, the carrier shielded the invasion fleet from Japanese air counterstrikes. On November 24th, Japanese Betty torpedo bombers attacked the fleet under cover of darkness. Enterprise was the primary target. 9 torpedo planes broke through the defenses. The carrier maneuvered sharply in the black night, radar tracking the attackers. Every torpedo missed. Big E was lucky once again. After 3 days of savage combat, Tarawa and Makan were secured. Enterprise had proven herself not only a durable warrior but also an indispensable support platform for amphibious operations. Operation Galvanic opened the road to the Marshalls and further west toward Japan. In February 1944, Enterprise took part in one of the war's most daring missions, the Truk Raid. Truk Lagoon in the Caroline Islands was Japan's main combined fleet anchorage, often called the Gibraltar of the Pacific. Surrounded by coral atolls and heavily fortified, it was considered almost impregnable, but American intelligence discovered that the main Japanese fleet had recently departed Truk, moving closer to the home islands. Admiral Spruance seized the opportunity. On February 16th to 17th, 1944, Enterprise and 5 other carriers launched massive strikes on Truk. Big E sent waves of dive bombers and torpedo planes that devastated the harbor. About 40 Japanese ships were destroyed, including 3 light cruisers, 4 destroyers, and roughly 30 transports. Over 270 Japanese aircraft were lost. That evening, Japanese torpedo bombers attacked Enterprise. 1 torpedo passed just under her stern without detonating. Another exploded 30 meters off her port side, causing only minor damage. The raid on Truk was a spectacular success. The base was neutralized, and Japan lost a key strategic stronghold. For Big E, it was yet another operation showcasing her versatility, from supporting amphibious assaults to spearheading deep strikes into enemy territory. The crew of Enterprise knew they were part of a growing momentum that would lead step by step to victory. Every mission brought them one step closer to Tokyo. On June 19th to 20th, 1944, Enterprise took part in the largest carrier battle in history, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The American invasion fleet at Saipan was attacked by Admiral Ozawa's Japanese task force, 9 carriers with about 430 aircraft. The Americans had 15 carriers with over 900 planes. Enterprise was part of Task Force 58 under Admiral Mark Mitcher. On the morning of June 19th, Japanese aircraft struck in 4 massive waves, but the American F-6F Hellcat fighters, guided by radar, intercepted and destroyed most of them before they could reach the fleet. Of the 373 Japanese planes that took off, only 130 returned. American pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Japanese aviators were poorly trained, their planes outdated, and U.S. defenses impenetrable. Enterprise was not hit even once. Her fighters shot down dozens of enemy aircraft. On June 20th, the U.S. fleet pursued the retreating Japanese. That evening, aircraft from Enterprise and other carriers located the enemy and launched a daring twilight attack. The carrier Hio was sunk and several other ships were damaged, but the return flight was perilous. Many planes were low on fuel and returning in darkness. Admiral Mitcher made a bold decision. He ordered every ship in the fleet to turn on its lights, despite the risk of submarine attack. Enterprise recovered dozens of aircraft, even those from other carriers. Some planes crashed while landing or ditched at sea, but most crews were saved. The battle ended in a crushing victory. Japan lost 3 carriers and about 600 aircraft. Enterprise once again came through unscathed. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 was the largest naval engagement in history. The Americans had landed in the Philippines, and Japan threw in all its remaining strength in a desperate attempt to destroy the invasion fleet. Enterprise was part of Task Force 38, operating north of Leyte Gulf. On October 24th, Admiral Ozawa's Northern Force, 4 lightly armed carriers with few planes, appeared as a decoy. It was a trap. Admiral Kurita's powerful battleship fleet was to slip through the San Bernardino Strait and strike the American transports. Admiral Halsey, commanding Task Force 38, took the bait. He led all available carriers, including Enterprise, northward to attack Ozawa's force. On October 25th, aircraft from Big E helped sink the Japanese carrier Zuikaku, the last surviving carrier from the Pearl Harbor attack. But while Halsey chased Ozawa, Kurita's force broke through the strait and attacked the lightly protected escort carriers off Samar. Only the heroism of those small escort ships stopped the Japanese battleships. Enterprise was too far north to assist. When Halsey finally turned back, it was too late. Kurita had already withdrawn. The battle ended in an American victory. Japan lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, and 10 cruisers, but Enterprise and Halsey were criticized for chasing the decoy. For Big E, it was a hard lesson. Even the greatest victories carry their controversies. The ship returned to supporting operations in the Philippines, unaware that its toughest test was still to come. After Leyte Gulf, Enterprise faced a new and terrifying weapon, the kamikaze. Japanese suicide pilots were willing to die to sink American ships. On May 14, 1945, Enterprise was operating off Okinawa, supporting the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. That morning, radar detected incoming aircraft. Fighters were launched, but one Japanese bomber broke through the defenses. The pilot dived straight at Enterprise at full speed. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire and hit the plane, but too late. The kamikaze crashed into the forward aircraft elevator, penetrating the flight deck and exploding inside the hangar. The blast was devastating. The bomb load and fuel ignited a massive fire. 14 men were killed instantly, and dozens were wounded. The flight deck had a 6-meter-wide hole. Temperatures inside the hangar reached 1,000 degrees. But the Enterprise crew, hardened by 3 years of war, knew exactly what to do. Fire parties fought the flames, doctors tended the wounded, and engineers assessed the damage. Within 30 minutes, the fire was under control. Within 3 hours, Enterprise was landing planes again on her aft deck. It was incredible. The ship that should have been out of action kept on fighting. Still, the damage was serious. On May 16th, Enterprise was withdrawn to Puget Sound for repairs. For the crew, it was a relief. 3 years of relentless frontline service had exhausted everyone, but it was also bittersweet. They knew that Big E had survived more than any other ship, and now she was closer to death than ever before. Repairs lasted until the autumn of 1945. By the time Enterprise was ready to return to action, the war was over. On August 6th and 9th, atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan announced its surrender. Enterprise had missed the end of the war. She had fought so long and so hard, but her mission wasn't over. In September 1945, Big E arrived in Japan as part of the occupation forces. Her planes patrolled over a devastated nation, and her crew witnessed firsthand the destruction that war had brought to both sides. In November, Enterprise began Operation Magic Carpet, the massive effort to bring American troops home. Over the following months, she made several voyages across the Pacific, carrying thousands of veterans back to the United States. For the crew, it was a bittersweet duty, joy at returning home mixed with the knowledge that Big E would soon no longer be needed. In January 1947, USS Enterprise was decommissioned at Bayonne, New Jersey. The carrier that had survived the entire war was now obsolete. New ships with angled decks and steam catapults were replacing the old veterans. Enterprise received 20 battle stars, the most awarded to any U.S. ship in World War II. Her crews shot down 911 enemy aircraft and sank 71 ships. She had taken part in nearly every major Pacific operation. Now, she stood silent in port, awaiting her fate. After decommissioning, Enterprise waited 11 years for her destiny. Veterans and admirals lobbied to preserve Big E as a museum. No ship had earned it more. But the Navy argued that the maintenance costs would be too high. In 1958, the decision was made. USS Enterprise would be scrapped. It was like a death sentence for a legend. In July 1958, the ship was towed to Kearny, New Jersey. Over the following months, Big E was methodically dismantled. The steel that had withstood Japanese bombs, torpedoes, and kamikazes was cut apart by torches, but the legacy of Enterprise did not die. Her name was passed to the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, USS Enterprise, CVN-65, which served from 1961 to 2012. Many veterans of CV-6 attended the commissioning ceremony, passing the ship's banner from father to son. Today, fragments of the original Enterprise are displayed in museums across the United States. Her bell rests at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. Models of Big E can be found in exhibits from Washington to Pearl Harbor. Each year, veterans gather to honor the memory of those who served aboard her. The story of USS Enterprise CV-6 is a story of survival, courage, and sacrifice. It is the tale of a ship that was never meant to survive the war. She was in every major battle, hit multiple times, and often fought alone when others had sunk. Yet she endured, a symbol of American spirit and determination. Big E was more than a ship. She was a home to thousands of sailors, a platform for hundreds of pilots, and a beacon of hope in the darkest days of war. Her legend lives on, reminding us that sometimes an ordinary ship can become immortal.